The biggest area of concern for Texas football at the midway point of spring practice? We'll tell you what it is on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Intro.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You were locked on to the Texas Longhorns. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner, Texas grad, Austin native, and longtime sports radio host here in the Lone Star State. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell your Longhorn friends about Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. We're at about the midway point of Texas spring practice, and we're starting to learn a little bit more about this year's team. Yesterday, we talked about a position that Steve Sarkisian feels very good about. That was the secondary. If you missed that episode, check it out. But Steve Sarkisian talked about that maybe being the best position on the team here in 2025. That was great. Today, we talk about a position that I don't think Steve Sarkisian feels very good about. That is defensive tackle. We'll start with a report from Chip Brown of Horns 24/7 talking about the defensive tackle room, and then we'll get to a little bit of sound from Steve Sarkisian's press conference earlier this week. First, here's what Chip's article says. Quote, a couple of sources told Horns 24/7 that defensive tackle is the biggest area of concern on the team at the moment because freshman Justice Terry has missed time this spring with a hamstring injury, and North Carolina transfer Travis Shaw has a knee issue that has lingered throughout his career. Purdue transfer Cole Brevard has been solid, as has Ohio State transfer Hero Kanu. Returnees Alex January and Melvin Hills III are progressing, while things are moving pretty quickly for freshmen Myron Charles and Josiah Sharma, according to one team source. Don't be surprised if Texas looks for two more defensive tackles when the portal window opens April 16th through the 25th. Quotes, if you roll into the season with the current group of defensive tackles, I'm not sure you can keep offensive linemen from getting to the second level and making life difficult for linebackers Anthony Hill Jr. and Leonga Lafau, said one source close to the team, end quote. So all of that was from Chip Brown's article from horns247.com. The good news, we're still 4.5 months away from the first game. The bad news, well, all of what I just read. They've already added 3 transfer defensive tackles this offseason, and they may need 2 more. That is crazy to think about. Here's Steve Sarkisian, again, earlier this week, talking about his defensive tackle.
A lot of new faces in there. Coach Baker's done a really nice job of kind of integrating them all, with some guys moving on and what that looks like. And so, but again, they're like the rest of the team. They're not a finished product yet, and there's some schematic things that some of the new transfers are learning. For the younger players, there's fundamentals, there's technique and scheme going on. So again, we're definitely fighting for more consistency across the board up front. But you see the flashes of what I think we can be down the road.
There's Sark, again, a couple of days ago, talking to the media. Not quite the same tone and sentiment when talking about the defensive tackles as we heard Sark when he was talking about the secondary, and we played that cut on yesterday's episode. So, look, the good news is there are flashes, but the bad news is it doesn't sound like the consistency is there yet for Texas football. Again, we've got until August 30th before the Longhorns actually play a game that counts. But according to the insiders and according to the coach himself, it sounds like there is room for improvement at defensive tackle. And again, you've already brought in 3 players from the portal this offseason. You did that in the early window. Now you might be in the market for 2 more in the spring window. Look, it's a premium position. It's one of the most important on the field. I don't want to make it sound like I'm downplaying the importance of great defensive tackle play, but to have 5 portal ads in one spot in one off season. I mean, that tells you that you haven't been doing a good enough job recruiting that spot out of high school. And most of that falls on Bo Davis, right? The former defensive line coach. He was an elite defensive line coach. He was not an elite recruiter. And you go back and look at some of the recent D-line classes that Texas brought in when Bo Davis was here. The 2023 class, you had just one interior defensive lineman signee that year. That was Sadir Mitchell, who is no longer with the program. In 2024, you had just two signees, Alex January and Melvin Hills, who we talked about a moment ago. Two signees, that's better than one, but those were the two lowest graded recruits outside of punter Michael Kern that Texas brought in the class of 2024. So not enough quantity and not enough quality in terms of high school defensive linemen, and you need those guys. I mean, it's no coincidence that Texas has had its two best seasons in a decade and a half in the years where it's had maybe its two best defensive lines, right? I mean, this group, you go back to 2023 with Byron Murphy, who was a first-round pick, and Tavondre Sweat, who was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year that season. Both of those guys were top 40 picks in the NFL draft. Both of those guys, I mean, I think that was the best 1-2 punch of interior defensive linemen in the country in college football a couple of seasons ago. And then last year, I mean, Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, I was a little concerned about what those guys were going to be, replacing Collins replacing T. Sweat and Byron Murphy. And those guys were great. There wasn't much of a drop off at all, if there even was a drop off in Texas defensive line play this past season. And obviously, Bill Norton and T.S. Avea and a few other transfers that Texas brought in helped make an impact too with the 2024 squad. So you've got to have those guys, especially in the SEC. And you have to be able to stop the run. And Texas has been elite at that in each of the past two seasons. They were the third-ranked run defense in America in 2023. They were the 12th ranked run defense in America this past season. You obviously want to get some pass rush from the interior of your defensive line as well, because any quarterback will tell you that the pressure they hate the most is the pressure right up the middle, right in their face, because they can't get out of the way. And you've got to have those war daddies, those difference makers on the inside of your defensive line, because that's been a huge part of why you've been able to make it to back-to-back conference title games and obviously back-to-back college football playoffs. So I'm a little concerned there, man. I hate hearing that Justice Terry is hurt, because that was your best recruit at that position. I hate hearing that Travis Shaw is dealing with an injury that has been lingering over the course of his entire college career. Doesn't sound like that's something that's going to get fixed overnight, because it's been plaguing him for years. And yeah, I don't love seeing reports that Texas still might need multiple bodies at defensive tackle, because those guys are not easy to find and they cost a lot. So that might impact your ability to go out and find a wide receiver, find a tight end, and address some of the other holes that you have on your roster. Now, the good news, some other good news, Texas is loaded at edge, right? You've got Colin Simmons, the reigning Sean Alexander Freshman of the Year in college football. You've got Ethan Burke back. You've got Trey Moore back. You've got Colton Vasek back. You've got talent. You've got experience. You've got depth at edge. We talked about the linebackers a little bit. Look, Anthony Hill, Leonga Lafau, very good players. Anthony Hill's an elite player. Leonga Lafau, I thought, had a really good season in 2024. I expect him to be even better in 2025. You bring in Brad Spence as well from Arkansas. Like, you're good in that room. And then again, we touched on it yesterday. The secondary is one of, if not your very best position on the football field. So the good news is you've got enough guys around defensive tackle to where, okay, they could pick up some of the slack if that room is not as good this year as it has been in the last two seasons. But man, Texas needs this defense to be great all around, especially early on, because you're breaking in a new quarterback and you've got what, 7, 8, 9 new starters on the offensive side of the football, 4 new offensive linemen. 3 of your best receivers are gone. Your top 3 tight ends are gone. You're losing Jaden Blue. So it might take a while for the offense to sort of find its rhythm. And with who you have in week 1, like, the offense might not have it all figured out and buttoned up when they're going up against Caleb Downs and that elite Buckeye defense. You got to make sure your defense is ready to travel for that game at the Shoe. You got to make sure your defense is good to go for the entirety of the season, because I think that should be the strength of this football team. When you look at talent and guys coming back, you need that group to be great. It's going to be tough to be great if you're not getting good defensive tackle play. Again, going back to that quote that Chip had from a team source, if offensive linemen are able to get to the second and third level because they're blowing through the interior defensive line, then you're going to have a tough time stopping the run, which is not going to be fun if you're watching a team that can't stop an opposing rushing attack. That's just miserable if you're a fan. So something to keep an eye on. Doesn't sound like the defensive tackle room is looking great right now, and it sounds like it is still a work in progress, and it sounds like some of that work might need to be done in the transfer portal. So we're 5 days away from the portal opening up again. We've talked about receiver. We've talked about tight end. We've talked a little bit about defensive line being a need. Now, after reading this story, I feel like defensive line is very much a need for Pete Kwiatkowski, Kenny Baker, and the rest of the Texas Longhorns. Comment below with your thoughts. What's your area of concern, and what is your level of concern for the Texas defensive front going into the 2025 season? All right, let's shift gears here. Tough story to read yesterday. Former Longhorn and current NFL draft prospect Isaiah Bond turned himself in to authorities in Frisco yesterday, less than 2 weeks before the draft. We'll give the latest information there and talk about how this could impact Bond's draft stock coming up next, right here on Locked on Longhorns. But first, a word for today's sponsor, TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to be able to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. Get it done while you're watching the golf this weekend. It is so simple. An expert is going to give your taxes their undivided attention. They're going to work on your return. They're going to provide you with real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day and your weekend. And the expert is going to find you every deduction possible. They'll file every form, every investment, everything, all with 100% accuracy so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. It is so simple. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only on the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Again, get your tax expert today at TurboTax.com. All right, welcome back to Locked on Longhorns, your team every day. Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network tweeted yesterday afternoon that former Texas wide receiver and current NFL draft prospect Isaiah Bond turned himself in to Frisco police yesterday morning for a matter related to an outstanding warrant for sexual assault. He posted bond and was subsequently released. Yes, he posted his last name. In other words, Bond was put in bonds until he posted Bond to remove Bond from bonds. All right, enough of the puns there. It goes without saying, this is not ideal. There's never a good time for this, but 13 days away from the first round of the NFL draft feels like maybe the worst possible time for this. Now, Isaiah Bond later yesterday released a statement that we'll read right now saying, quote, regarding the accusation made against me, I would appreciate the time and opportunity to defend myself and prove the claims made patently false. I'm in full cooperation with the authorities and will remain a willing and active participant in the investigation. Unfortunately, claims like these prove to be harmful to all involved, absent full review. I kindly request that all reserve judgment until the authorities provide a complete report based on truth and evidence. Humbly, Isaiah Bond, end quote. So, look, I'm a believer in innocent until proven guilty, and Isaiah Bond is asking for everybody to, let this thing play out and wait till you get all of the truth and all of the evidence that's out there. Don't rush to judgment on me, please. And I think you can look at another former Longhorn, a guy who was drafted last year, Xavier Worthy, who was arrested for a felony domestic violence charge back in the month of March. No charges were ultimately filed. He ended up suing his ex-fiancée, claiming that she was extorting him, said she tried to beat him up and she destroyed a bunch of his stuff. I mean, it was a mess, obviously. I read earlier this week, by the way, that court records show that Worthy's lawsuit filed against his ex-fiancée had been dropped. So it seems like we're nearing, or maybe we're at the end of that whole situation. But again, you get a mugshot of Xavier Worthy, and people rush to judgment and start accusing him of this, that, and the other. And then we get more information, and Xavier Worthy has been cleared of any wrongdoing. No charges were ever filed. So I bring that story up to say, again, don't rush to judgment here. People saw Worthy get arrested, and people see bond, and they see that he turned himself in, and they see felony domestic violence, and they start assuming and they start accusing. Let this thing play out a little bit here. Now, again, it goes without saying that this doesn't help Isaiah Bond at all. A guy who's had a slightly disappointing last 12 months, if we're being completely honest here. Like at this time last year, people were talking about Isaiah Bond being a potential first-round pick in the 2025 draft. Had an inconsistent year in Austin, dealt with a couple of injuries that didn't help his cause, didn't have the best combine performance ever. Now you've got this story on top of that. So it's been a bit of a tumultuous year for Isaiah Bond. But look, the league has proven time and time again, if you can play, you can play. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm accusing Isaiah Bond of anything here. I want to let this thing play out. But there are examples of guys actually being convicted of crimes, getting to play in the National Football League. Like, if you're good enough, they will find you. And hell, I'll bring up another example. T'Vondre Sweat got arrested last April. I think it was like April 7th on a DWI charge, and it didn't really affect his draft stock at all. Like, people were projecting him to slip. Oh my God, this is horrible timing for T Sweat. This plus the weight, like, oh my, he might fall out of the second day of the NFL draft. He might be a fourth or a fifth round pick. It felt like the sky was falling on T'Vondre Sweat at this time leading up to the draft in 2024. Well, he ended up going 38th overall very early in the second round to the Tennessee Titans. Again, if you could play, there will be a spot for you. And Isaiah Bond, despite him not having the best year, not having the best combine performance, he still has elite speed. He still has put enough on film over the course of his college career, and the potential is absolutely there for him to be a great wide receiver in the National Football League. Someone's going to fall in love with him. Hell, I think a few teams already have fallen in love with him, but this, I don't think, is going to hurt Isaiah Bond too much as we get closer to the draft, especially if, the claims that he's making in his statement that all of this is patently false and my name's going to be cleared and there's nothing to worry about here. If that's all right and Isaiah Bond is true to his word there, then I think he'll end up being drafted in a similar spot to where he was going to get drafted. Maybe there's a team or two that are taking them off their board now. Like, hey, if we don't get any more clarity on this situation between now and 2 weeks from now, then we don't want to take any chances just in case something is wrong. But hopefully we'll get some more intel there. And these NFL teams are doing their homework to try to get as much information as they possibly can. So I think IB will be fine. Very interested to see where he ends up going. I think he is likely a day 2 pick at this point. I don't think there's any chance he goes in the first round, although we did talk about a mock earlier this week that had Isaiah Bond going with the last pick on night 1 of the draft. I don't think that happens. I think it's somewhere on day 2. I would have told you that before Ian Rappaport's tweet yesterday afternoon. I still feel the same way. I think Isaiah Bond goes somewhere in round 2 or round 3. If I had to guess, I would say round 3, but would it shock me at all if he goes in the latter half of the second? No, not at all. Again, great traits, the elite speed, and wide receivers are more important now than they've ever been in the history of the National Football League. So someone is going to be enamored with everything that Isaiah Bond brings to the table, and that's going to help him make some money at the next level. All right. Yeah, crazy story, though. Unfortunate timing there, and a tough one to read for sure. All right. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, by the way. We've got one segment to go on today's episode of Locked on Longhorns. Let's shift gears here and talk a little Longhorn baseball. Texas is back on the road this weekend. The Horns open up a 3-game series against Kentucky in Lexington tonight. We'll preview the series and give our predictions coming up next right here on Locked on Longhorns. All right, welcome back. Locked on Longhorns, your team every day. A reminder, give the video a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. If you are listening via podcast, thank you very much. Don't forget to rate 5 stars and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Having a lot of fun here as the new host of Locked on Longhorns. Really appreciate the early support and excited to continue to grow this thing with y'all each and every day. Let's talk Texas baseball. What a start to the year it's been for the Horns. Texas 27-4 on the season. I don't know if I can even say start to the year anymore. We're pretty much past halfway of the schedule, and the Longhorns are off to their best start since 2004 with that 27-4 record. This team currently tied for first in the SEC at 11-1 in conference. Of course, the Horns are tied with the Hogs of Arkansas. Those two teams will meet in the very first weekend of May. So still plenty to be decided before we get to that massive, what currently would be a top 2 series. Obviously, again, a bunch of games for both teams between now and then. But I know a lot of folks are going to be circling that one on the calendar. But before any of that, let's talk about this 3-game series against Kentucky. Man, Kentucky had a tremendous 2024. They burst onto the scene. They made it all the way to the College World Series, one of the best stories in America this past season. But they lost a bunch of guys from that Omaha squad, and it's been a little bit more rocky road, a little bit more topsy-turvy, a little bit more of a roller coaster ride, whatever you want to say, for Kentucky baseball at the start of 2025. They're currently 18-12 on the year, 5-7 in SEC play. They only lost 16 games in all of last season. They're already at 12 losses this season. It's a solid team. They're middle of the pack in the conference right now. Good hitting squad. They don't hit for a ton of power. They do hit a lot of doubles, but not a lot of home runs this year. They play small ball. They get on base, they steal bags, they lay down sacrifice bunts, they move guys over. It's a little bit of Augie ball that I know you Texas baseball fans are very familiar with. Their pitching stats aren't spectacular. Hell, nobody's pitching stats compared to Texas's are all that good because the Longhorns lead the conference in just about every major pitching statistical category. And hell, they're top 5 in the country in most of those categories as well. For Kentucky, their starters have been really good. The bullpen's been shaky. So a key to the series for Texas, get to the bullpen as quickly as you can because the Wildcats don't have the depth there that Texas has, and that's where they have been vulnerable. So if you could put up some crooked numbers early, knock these starters out of the game by getting their pitch counts up, then, yeah, you've got a chance to make some noise with the bats this weekend. Kentucky does make a lot of errors defensively, too, so put the ball in play, and good things can happen there. Kentucky has lost 3 games in a row. They have yet to be swept in SEC play. Again, they're 5-7 in the conference. They've lost 3 of 4 of their conference series, but they've won at least one game in all 4 of those series. The one weekend victory they had was against A&M. They took 2 of 3 against the Aggies a couple of weeks ago. Feels like everybody's taking 2. Hell, it feels like most people are taking 3 against A&M when they play them this season. But that'll be a challenge for Texas. Again, the Longhorns only have 1 loss in SEC play. They've got 3 sweeps and won 2 of 3 from LSU. Would love the Longhorns to get another sweep, but Kentucky has made that very difficult for other teams in this conference to do. We do not complain about series wins on this show. So if we're talking about the Horns taking 2 of 3 from the Cats on Monday's show, then I won't be complaining at all. Some storylines to look out for. We'll see if A-Rod comes back at some point this series. The true freshman who was awesome before going out with an injury a couple of weeks ago in the Missouri series. He's missed the last couple of weeks for Texas. Seems like he's getting closer to being healthy. Sounds like he could play this weekend. Maybe Texas will give him a few more days off, and we can expect to see Adrian Rodriguez back at third base against Auburn next weekend when they come to town, or maybe he'll play in the midweek game on Tuesday. But A-Rod second on the team in batting average before going down with that injury. It'd be a nice addition to this Texas lineup that, look, has been perfectly fine. I mean, without Max Blue and without Adrian Rodriguez, that could have spelled doom for Longhorn baseball, but the bats, everybody else has been picking it up. Gasparino's been great. Galvan continues to be great. Jalen Flores, Ethan Mendoza burst out of his slump with his performance on Tuesday. Texas has been cruising without A-Rod, but again, it goes without saying you would love to have him back because he's one of your best bats, and he's made a tremendous impact on this team in his first year on the 40 acres. Also, what does Jared Spencer do for an encore? He's on the mound tonight. Some potential weather issues in Lexington, so we'll see if they get this game in tonight or if we have to worry about a doubleheader at some point this weekend. I really hope we're not talking about the curfew rule when we come back next week because that's a mess and ridiculous, and it's a joke that this conference has a freaking curfew for college kids. I thought once you got to college, you were beyond that, but That's a conversation for another time. What does Jared Spencer do tonight, coming off of maybe his best start as a Texas Longhorn, maybe the best start of his life? 7 innings of one-run ball against the best offense in college baseball, the Georgia Bulldogs. Had a career-high 11 strikeouts. I mean, Georgia couldn't touch him. The fastball was touching 97. I think it got to 98 once or twice as well. The slide piece was nasty. He had Georgia hitters off balance all night long. That game was at home. This game on the road, it's supposed to be chilly in Lexington as well. Again, because of the potential rain, I don't know what the crowds are going to look like. So this kind of feels like a bring your own energy series for Texas baseball. You're not at home. You're not playing a top 3 team in the country like you did last week. And yeah, you're dealing with cold and the elements and smaller crowds. Like it's bring your own juice if you're Texas. Now, the Horns were in a similar situation against Missouri. Missouri's a lot worse than Kentucky, but still some similar factors there. The Longhorns went on the road and swept Mizzou in their most recent road series. Hopefully they can do the same. But again, 2 out of 3 will be fine. That's my prediction for Texas. I think they take 2 of 3 and win this series. But I hope I'm slightly wrong with my pick because, again, I'm hoping we're talking about the Horns bringing out the brooms when we're here on Monday. And man, this team has been so much fun to watch. It's appointment television right now. It really is. You got to go out of your way to watch Texas baseball because this team, they're complete. They've got everything you need to make a deep run in the postseason. And with what they've done in their first year in the toughest conference in the sport, it is remarkable to watch the job that Jim Schlossnagle and Nolan Cain and Troy Tulowitzki and, of course, pitching coach Max Weiner have done in their first year. I thought it would take a little more time than this, but man, they've got things figured out, and hopefully the ride continues in Lexington over these next 3 days. We'll take your thoughts and your predictions as well. What say you? What does Texas do on the road at UK? That's going to do it for today's episode. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Thank you very much for making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day. For your next listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as your favorite college players and Texas Longhorns. Get ready for the next level. Get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day with Locked On NFL Draft. You can find those guys on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Plenty of Texas football, plenty of Texas baseball, more Texas basketball. There's a lot to talk about always with the Texas Longhorns, and we've got you covered every single day right here on Locked On Longhorns. Appreciate you guys making this a part of your day. Please like, please share, please subscribe, all of those great things, and enjoy the weekend. Horns up, mics off. We'll see y'all next time. This is Locked On Longhorns.